Welcome to I Plan for Marriage, the podcast, a space where love meets preparation. I'm Martha Brown, a marriage planner and chaplain.
And I'm Vivian Vi Baldwin of Designs by Lady Vi, Martha's co-host. I'm a wedding planner and designer and educator. Together, we'll guide you through the two most important journeys, building a strong foundation for your marriage and navigating the ins and outs of wedding planning.
We'll share the conversations you should have before saying I do and the details that matter when planning the celebration of your love.
Whether you're engaged, newlywed, or dreaming about your big day, we're here to give you the insight, encouragement, and a touch of inspiration. Let's get started.
Welcome and thanks for listening in today for another episode of I Plan for Marriage, the podcast. I'm Martha Brown.
And I'm Vivian Vi Baldwin. And today we have a special guest, Felipe Christopher Bloom, a licensed clinical mental health counselor, author, and trauma specialist, who's going to help us dive into how do couples ID resources to maintain, protect, and enhance their relationship.
Thank you, Vivian. Felipe, please take a moment to tell the I Plan for Marriage, the podcast community a little more about yourself and what you have to offer professionally in your field.
Okay. For the last 2 decades, I've been a licensed clinical mental health counselor, certified clinical trauma professional, and I've authored multiple books regarding mental health, wellness, recovery, and what I call love and progress journeys. They can find me at mrblue.net. And my work centers on helping people understand that emotional healing and trauma recovery are the necessary foundations for building healthy, lasting relationships, including a successful relationship or marriage. I specialize in evidence-based methods like solution-focused therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, and it's all about improving communication and emotional regulation, which we often may have not seen in our families of origin.
Amazing. So we're going to dive right on into it. So Felipe, there are times when a couple will face a challenge that exceeds their ability and capacity to address. What is the most common communication mistake couples make during an argument, and what is the one immediate practical tip that they can use to correct it?
If I had to guess, I would have to say the single most common and destructive communication mistake couples make during an argument is using absolutes and generalizations. There's no such things as always. There's no such thing as never, because these things trigger defensiveness and escalates conflict. You know, the mistake is, what it might sound like might be, you always forget to call when you're late, or you never listen to me, or every time we talk about money, you want to argue. These are not absolutes. This can't be happening every time. It can't be instances in which it never happened. So these generalizations, they're unfair because they ignore any past instances when the partner did do the right thing. And they put that person on the defensive and makes them react with defensiveness. They don't want to be accused of the pain. They don't want to hear, I never did that. I always do that. You know what I'm saying? So they react accordingly. No, they argue back. No, that's not the facts. I did this, this, and this, and that. They know, in fact, that they've done X, Y, Z. So the best method is just that, X, Y, Z. The X being the behavior. You know, identifying when you feel a certain way. When you come home without calling, I, the feeling. I feel completely disrespected and anxious. And then Z, the reason. Because I start to worry and need to know where you are and that you're safe. That's probably the easiest way to address it. But we have to learn how to address each other more appropriately and communicate, focus better. Because why does these things come to a pivotal, a high point of conflict when it could have been addressed a lot earlier before it even became such an anger trigger point?
What I noticed, Felipe, in your example was that the difference between the two was that one was accusatory, you never, you always. And what I noticed in the second example, the one that is more manageable, maybe less stress producing, is that the person is using I statements.
Yes,
and
right.
They are owning, that individual is owning what is being felt, as opposed to what many of us do, and that is, you made me angry.
That's right.
You made me upset.
That's right.
And so that person is taking ownership. So yeah, I caught that. I caught
Because
that.
nobody makes you do anything. You're responsible for your own feelings and emotions. Now, that what they did might have triggered you to feel that way, but they cannot be responsible for how you feel or how you act. They can only be responsible for their actions, and you're responsible for your feelings and your actions to that. A lot of times we just don't have a lot of emotional maturity, and it's no fault of our own per se, but when we know better, we have to do better.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Awesome. Felipe, with the goal of building relationships one conversation at a time, in your experience, what are the top 2 or 3 most common yet solvable conflicts that you see reoccurring in long-term relationships?
That's a good question. You almost stumped me on that one. It gets to the heart of what I focus on when I work with long-term couples, separating the solvable issues from the deeper, often perpetual issues. With the goal of building relationships one conversation at a time, I see 2 recurring themes. The conflict of mismanaged logistics, what I like to call the roommate trap. This is when the daily grind, the chores, the childcare, the finances, they transform these 2 people that love each other into task managers who feel more like roommates than lovers. The real issue is not the chores themselves, but the silent growth of resentment and the feeling of unfair burden. Whether one person is doing more of the chores or being more of the financial caretaker or spending more time with the children or doing more for the children, then that mismanaged logistics, not working as a team, but working as roommates. I'm doing this, you're doing that, we're all contributing, but not contributing in a team type of way. That's one of the biggest things I see throughout. That's number one off the top. People say, he cheated on me. No, it's really this roommate trap that might have led to infidelity. There might have been this roommate trap that led to financial irresponsibilities. And then the second thing I see a lot is the conflict of transactional communication. This is the failure to communicate your needs in a way that creates connection, often because we fall into the habit of communicating only when we need a specific action from our partner. In my experience, couples who learn to treat the daily tasks as team problems and who commit to emotional check-ins are the ones who can keep those solvable issues from draining the energy needed to manage the tougher, more perpetual conflicts. One of the things I do in every couple's therapy session that I'm in, I make sure that one of the action items is check-ins. Check-ins. Before you go to bed, check in. At one point I was thinking weekly, but the way this world is set up right now, I changed that weekly thing into a daily thing because we have to check in. And I have clients that come back to me, they may not even be in couples therapy, but the reason why they're in therapy, one of the contributing causes might be that they're having issues with their spouse. Oftentimes, things are getting better when they were doing check-ins. And then we start seeing a little bit more problems in the neighborhood. And what is it? What's the number one question that comes out my mouth? Well, what's going on with the check-ins? Oh, we stopped doing that weeks ago.
What does could you expound a little bit more in terms of what an emotional check-in would look like? What conversation would the couple have? And also, what is the time frame? How long should that conversation be, that check-in?
I would say, it all depends. Every couple, every situation is different, time constraints, different needs of the family. But I would say, the first one might be longer. It might be a lot of things you're hashing out. But because we're doing them daily, the following ones shouldn't be as long. The ones weeks later shouldn't be as long because you're not unpacking a lot of stuff. You're unpacking what's going on that day. And I believe in staying solution focused. We're talking about what's happening now, not what happened 2 weeks ago, not what happened years ago. So it all depends. It could be a heavy conversation. Initially, it's going to be heavy. It's going to be a lot of stuff, but hopefully we do that in therapy. But, you want to get to the point where it might be 10, 15 minutes. How are you doing today? How could I have been a better support for you today? What can I do for you tomorrow to lessen the burden on you? Things of that nature. I was telling a male client recently about, he thinks that just working, and, doing a couple things here and there is sufficient. when he didn't understand the enormous pressure his wife was going through, studying for a psychological exam, still being a mother, taking her children to these functions, having a child transition to college, moving away from home. He didn't understand what she needed. But when he started talking to her and discussing with her regarding how he could better be a support, because he never touched the dishes, maybe, seeing that the dishes are still there in the morning, get that before you go to work. This the little things. It all depends really. I want to say it kind of goes back to the 5 languages of love, but we know there's probably a lot more than that. But we're just going to go with the original 5. What are her needs? Does she need encouragement? Does she need affirmations? But most, well, I ain't gonna say most, a lot of the women in the couples that I service are, they like service. Acts of service is how they receive their love. And a lot of times the men will be on the opposite spectrum. I want quality time, or I want touch. Where you have to meet the person where they're at so you can address their needs and so they can feel more comfortable in the relationship. So to answer your question, like I said, initially it might be an hour, but in 2, 3, 4 weeks, I would hope it wouldn't be more than 10 to 15 minutes.
It's funny that you brought up the love languages, because as you were speaking, that's immediately where my mind went, because it seems as though with the daily check-ins, by them essentially asking and responding, it allows them to further dive into what they actually need. By you doing this for me will help me in this way. And again, it kind of, like I said, it immediately went to the love languages when you were speaking, and it was funny how you brought that up. So
sounds like with that skill that you're introducing to them, that it helps them move away from the, as you mentioned earlier, the always and the never, because they're doing something now in a daily way.
That's right.
That hopefully sort of redirects their behavior, their understanding of each other. And so I imagine that would help. And also some couples tend to have, as they say, those receipts. And those receipts can be years old, not just weeks old. So hopefully that cuts down on people doing that and all the blaming. So that's great, those check-ins.
And why is one keeping receipts? Those receipts should have already been dealt with, processed, and given to the IRS. Let it go.
Absolutely, absolutely. So even with that said, sometimes leaning on family and friends for insights or opinions within a relationship can have a detrimental outcome. So Felipe, how does your approach as a licensed clinical mental health counselor, specifically utilizing dialectical behavior therapy and solution-focused therapy, translate into an effective marriage or couples counseling?
Well, first and foremost, even outside of being a therapist, I like to say, you can complain to your family or your friends all you want, and you can tell them all the juice and all the things that's going on in a relationship. But when it's all said and done and you resolve that issue with the relationship, a lot of times they still hold on to that information and they treat that spouse accordingly, or they treat that partner accordingly. Everybody don't need to be in your business. But to answer your question in a therapeutic way, couples lean too heavily on external advice. A lot of people, they rely on their homeboys, their homegirls, their mama, their daddy, their aunts, their granny. But that undermines their own unity. Y'all are supposed to be one. That's what I thought marriage was. You become as one. That's why, I like to focus on, mindfulness, which is a DBT component, teaching people to pause and observe their physical and their emotional state. Saying, my chest is tight, or I'm flooded with emotions. I'm really, really angry right now. Just understanding where they're at. And the benefit is to learn to recognize and call a time out before that emotional brain hijacks the conversation. Acknowledge what you're feeling, acknowledge what you're saying, and verbalize it, and let your partner know. If they care about you, they'll address it accordingly. And then distress tolerance, another DBT concept. Help couples build skills to endure moments of discomfort without making things work. Stopping the urge to lash out, or stopping the urge to withdraw and isolate or go to another place. By doing this, they gain the ability to sit with the discomfort and manage the tension without letting it go to a place where they can't come down from. Interpersonal effectiveness. Another DBT technique is the core communication module. Practice clear ways to ask for your needs to be met, saying no, and managing conflict while maintaining respect. No is one of the most powerful words on the planet. When people gain the ability to say no, they become superheroes. But in doing so, couples learn, like we said earlier, the I statements and assertive communication techniques, which was required to get their needs met without attacking their partner. Regarding solution-focused therapy, well, that's about here and now. We focus on the exceptions. You tell me about the time in the last week when this problem didn't happen or was just a little bit better. By this, we're interrupting that negative cycle of highlighting the existing strengths, and we focus on the successes, the wins of that relationship. And this shows the couple that they already possess the skills to solve the problem. You just need to do what works. And then the miracle question. I might ask, if you woke up tomorrow and this thing was resolved, what small visible thing would your partner be doing differently? That cuts through the ambiguity and forces couples to define small, specific, actionable steps for change, setting clear goals instead of vague wishes or big wishes, right? And then scaling questions, 1 to 10. 10 being perfect, 0 being, oh my gosh, why did I marry this fool? Where are you on managing temper? What would it take to move from that number to a higher number? Let's say they're really angry. They got it like a, they're really low on the scale. But what would it take to get to a higher scale? And then that's the action steps, the goals to get them there. I'm not offering advice, I'm just offering tools, and a lot of tools they already have, they just need to reinvest in.
Yeah, what caught my attention was a timeout. When I was married, that was one of the things that I did learn to begin to use, because my spouse wanted to know that a conversation was going to end. And I needed closure if there was an issue. And so what we began to do was set aside time that we would talk about whatever the issue was and to frame it. So if we had an issue, we're going to talk about it at this specific time for this length of time, even if it wasn't resolved. And the only way we would go beyond that time would be if we both agreed. And that way we both were in a win-win situation. I knew that there was going to be a conversation, and he knew it wasn't going to drag on and on and on and on. So you really said a lot of, you gave us a steak right there.
And potato.
That's right, Vivi.
Well, I don't eat beef.
So you don't eat beef?
Oh, man. One question that I had based on what you stated, you mentioned essentially the ability to say no, right? Do you find it that most couples shy away from saying no because they feel that because it is their partner, and not somebody else, that they have to say yes, or that they feel that they are not contributing to the relationship the way that they should by saying no? Like, what's your intake on that?
It could be various things. I think the points that you made are very valid, but also the fact that by saying no, am I hurting my partner? Why, if they're asking a request of me, should I have the power to do so? But you can't be filled with power all the time, especially if you're pouring out and you're not being refilled, right? You can't pour from an empty vessel. So I would say that a lot of times it's just about, not wanting to disappoint the partner, feeling entitled to help or assist the partner in that way. But the caveat is then that animosity might come into place. You know what I'm saying? That feeling is like, I ain't want to do that anyway. What did the Bible say? Something to the effect, if you're not doing it with a glad heart, don't do it anyway. You know what I'm saying? So not doing it with a glad heart, you know what I'm saying? Feeling some type of way about having to doing it. Not doing it, giving your all when you're doing it. And then holding on to that. And even, you don't even have to, consciously, you may not even know why you feel a certain way. But those consistent not saying no's, now has a buildup of angst, anger, disgust even maybe with your partner. And there's really no definitive reason why, but just that you're drained because you did not protect your own boundaries in saying no when you felt you should have said no.
Makes sense. Definitely makes sense. Because you're overextending because you didn't say no within your own relationship. So, okay.
Yeah, the word resentment came to my mind when you hit a lot of different emotions, feelings that a person can have, disgust, anger, but resentment and regret came to my mind. And I can
Mm,
just imagine that that would really be a strain on a relationship and really weigh it down, and it would not. It would move from a thriving relationship probably to just surviving,
mm.
just
Get
sort of
that, barely
going
surviving
through
on a
life.
string, right? Oh my gosh.
Holding
Mm.
up. Okay. So even with that said, because of course there is definitely an ongoing need to intentionally nurture your relationship. So as a certified clinical trauma professional, how does past individual trauma, even if seemingly unrelated, often surface and complicate, the conflict resolution within a marriage?
In my work in trauma, I find the greatest threat to a marriage during conflict often isn't that current disagreement. It's the unhealed wounds of the past. Individual trauma, even if it's occurred decades ago, even if you don't remember the trauma. My mom is a great example of that. It seems unrelated to your partner, but it sabotages the conflict resolution by transforming that present situation in your marriage by, you're activating your survival mechanisms in your body. You know what I'm saying? You're reacting or you're developing survival skills and coping skills regarding any conflict. They're almost elevated or exaggerated because of unresolved trauma. This could play out in many ways: isolation, withdrawal, being argumentative, being just on edge or being uneasy, not being able to perform intimately with your partner because of it. Because one, the body keeps the score, not my saying, but a saying by a great author. You know what I'm saying? The pain that we have inside is stored in our body. And if something reminisces in us regarding something that might be similar, then when our body activates to protect us, and sometimes it protects us in maladaptive ways, then they can play out in relationships. My mom's on her, I'm not telling her business, but she's on her third marriage, likely because of unresolved trauma. It leaves an individual with a heightened hair trigger nervous system. When it's seemingly small conflict, a little bitty argument, the brain doesn't register it as a discussion about chores or money. It flags it as the original painful event because it doesn't know better. The brain, as powerful as it is also very weak in many ways. It's very impressionable. You know what I'm saying? It only knows what it knows, and it only does what it does, and it's trying its best to protect you. Or is it? The brain is the most selfish part of the human body. It's the only selfish part of the human body. So the slight raise of tone, a dismissive sigh, a walking away mid-sentence, they can trigger the trauma survivor. That reaction becomes disproportionate, like bam, to what's really going on, because they're involuntarily responding to the memory of an unresolved threat. They might spiral into, different trauma responses: fight, that's aggression, lashing out, cussing; fight, avoidance or overscheduling, just keeping busy so they don't have to deal with the partner; freezing, stonewalling, not saying that, like I ain't even talking to them, I don't hear you, I have nothing to say to you; emotional shutdown; or fawn, that means over apologizing, being capulating, just being reassuring, I guess, to keep the relationship intact. But this is also a trigger response to trauma.
Oh, that was a lot. I'm just sitting here thinking, and I'm wondering, for persons who are not in a relationship, in other words, not a marital relationship or a couple relationship, but see these responses in other relationships that they have, whether it's work, whether it's with friends, whether it's with families. What would be, or would it be beneficial to them to begin to address these issues so that when they do, if that's their desire, meet someone to be in a couple relationship, to be married, would it not benefit them to do the work early rather than doing it later when they're in that relationship? I'm just, I don't know, that comes to my mind.
I think the benefit of getting that work done before marriage, before any significant relationship, or early on in the relationship, or later, whatever you happen to get to it, I think it is because it subconsciously, it can manifest in so many ways in damaging that relationship. From what I've seen, what I know, I've seen multiple relationships fall because of unresolved trauma. And then, you know, the person might come to therapy after the divorce or after the breakup, and they'll talk about, you know, we'll go and look at, you know, how they were raised or who they were raised by. And not even if it didn't happen directly to them, just maybe their observations of how their parents or their grandparents interacted can be traumatic in that way. They don't know how to navigate. You only know how to act the way that you were trained up to act. The only information that you can gain or do or act on is what you receive. And yeah, we could say, well, the TV shows you something different or media shows you something different, but that's not a real reality to you. It's what you've seen or what you've experienced mainly that can impact how you interact with others going forward. This trauma can not only impact intimate relationships, but they play out in, you know, friend relationships, business relationships, in essence, a relationship with yourself. You cannot be your best you if you can't really feel to the full extent in which you need to feel.
Yeah. My question would be like, how does one, because of course, you know, people get so set in, well, that's just the way I am, or they think that, you know, the way that they behave comes just, I don't know, just because that's, again, leaning back towards who they are, not realizing that their behavior stems from something deeper that might have happened in childhood. Like, what would be, like, what's the click? Like, how could someone, like, know that, okay, this is a little bit deeper than just the way I am. Let me go seek help. After you,
well, I'm a therapist. I would want people to get help whenever they have an issue or a problem. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of stuff that we can use assistance with in therapy. I would say, you know, even if you're not, you know, you don't feel you have a diagnosis, because I don't necessarily believe in diagnosis. The DSM-5-TR still does not show the full picture of what goes on with our people, you know what I'm saying? Or the diagnosis criteria still doesn't equate to what our people are addressed. I'm just gonna go on a segue, sorry. I've seen multiple Black men being diagnosed with schizophrenia. But don't many of us commune with our ancestors? So are we truly hallucinating, or is it not understood that we communicate with our ancestors, our loved ones that guide us on this journey called life? But let somebody who doesn't know our culture or understand where we come from, oh, they're hallucinating. They're reacting to audio and visual hallucinations. So I'm gonna get back on track, y'all. So with that, you know what I'm saying, I would say, you know, anybody, if nothing else, you know what I'm saying, get an assessment regarding, you know, where you at and where you are gonna go. I would say before you tie the knot, because unresolved issues that you may not even be aware of, you know, unresolved ways to process or how to communicate, they can be so impactful on the relationship. Not saying anything against Black and brown families or whoever y'all serve in your podcast, but what I say is that in many families, communication is not appropriate. Many families, if you spend 8 hours at work, you know, however much time it takes for you to get to work and from home, but then let's calculate how much time you spend actually communicating with your family members before you go to bed. And we'll see that number is in far contrast to this time we spent communicating with our co-workers. And in that lack of communication, and if we see that in our home, our father's coming home from work, our mother's coming home from work if she work or whatever, and they're cooking and they're cleaning and they're going to bed and they're watching TV, they're going to blah, blah, blah. How much time do they spend talking to their children? How much time do they spend interacting as a family? If they ate at the table, fine, 45 minutes. If they told them to go to bed, or if they told them to wash it, they told them to read for me 20 minutes, but that still does not equal any significant amount of time of interactions. And what we saw is what we learned is what we know.
Sounds like that a lot of intentionality needs to go into one's relationship.
Yes.
Especially around communication. You said quite a bit there, and I have oftentimes thought that I spend more time at work than I do with my significant, when I was married, with my husband, and even with family. And I think I began to notice how that it was almost like I was justifying maybe some of my attitude or some of my behaviors, some of my moodiness, if you will, because of work. And I began to change that around and say, wow, these are the people that should anything occur to me, where I would die still working, these are the people who are still going to be grieving, still going to be hurting, still going to be remembering me long after I'm gone. And if anybody I need to show up for, it needs to be those who are most intimate and most that I'm just too,
Right.
and have a investment in me beyond just someone who is carrying out a mission, vision, and values for a business.
That's
So yeah, that intentionality. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, wow, this has been a rich conversation, and this has moved rather quickly. I'm looking at how long we have talked, but before we let you go, Felipe, I wanted to ask for the I Plan for Marriage podcast community beyond self-help for individuals. Do you have a specific book or resource that you recommend couples read together to improve their relationship actively? And if so, why? Why that one?
I mean, I would promote somebody else, but on this occasion, hey, I would recommend, this relationship communication workbook I developed through my years of couple counseling and marriage resolution. And I recommend it because it's multiple activities that the couples can do together to improve communication. We find that through healthier communication, we can resolve a lot of issues, learn about how to use I statements, and learn how to address issues that may have not came up, but may come up later if we don't resolve them beforehand. Catching something while it's an anthill before it becomes a sizable mountain. So I would highly recommend, the Relationship Communication Workbook, available now on Amazon.com. And the reason, like I said, it focuses on, individual, but it also focuses on inward as well as outward reflection, And if I can't think of another book that I could recommend even higher, unless it was another one that I wrote.
Fair enough.
That's right. Celebrate you, and we celebrate you because you have really
Absolutely.
given us
No,
some
I'm
really
not trying to be
information.
braggadocious or nothing at all. For real, I'm not. But I was just looking at other books that I read. They didn't really address the needs of my clients or address the needs of my own intimate personal relationships. I find I can, pulling an eclectic approach from DBT, from solution focus, from, just acceptance and commitment, by pulling these resources and making it palatable to the people that I serve. That's why I believe this book is the perfect book or a great resource for people that's in an intimate relationship, in a marriage, or thinking about getting into a marriage. I would hope that they would use it beforehand.
Mhm.
Yes, I agree beforehand, but we know that there may be a couple out there that is on the brink of giving up.
Right.
And so as we conclude the podcast, I want you to give us a blueprint, if you will, to the I Plan for Marriage podcast community for those who may be right there at the brink, that would help them maybe come back and realize that they can learn skills and they can be intentional and right side that relationship up.
I think it was the blueprint, and I like that word blue because, my last name and all. The most destructive force at the brink of a relationship is resentment. I see it many times, and sometimes it's years on top of years of resentment built from, a lot of times, we find later, misinterpretation. When we're exhausted and ready to quit, our mind is only capable of seeing the worst attributes of my partner. I think of my own situation. I'm only seeing the negative things, but why am I not seeing the positive things? A great mother, a great cook, pays her bills on time, take care of her responsibilities, a hard worker, etc. But why am I focusing on the things she's not doing? But we often do that when that resentment starts building up. So stop trying to solve the problem and instead perform a temporary, radical act of observation. For the next 3 days, consciously look for one moment, no more than one a day, where your partner's behavior could be interpreted as a bid for connection or a sign of care, even if it looks like an annoyance. So you reframe the annoyance. If your partner's criticizing your spending, which is a fight response, Reframe it in your mind as an anxious bid for safety, a cry for connection. Then acknowledging the effort. If your partner withdraws, a freeze flight response, then later brings you a cup of coffee without asking, don't dismiss it as just coffee. See it as a repair attempt, their clumsy, quiet way of saying, I'm back and I still care. And then validate the intent. Instead of analyzing that mistake, acknowledge their intent. Say simply, I see that you're trying, or I thank you for reaching out. So when you're on the brink, you don't need a strategy for a lifetime. You need a strategy for the next 5 minutes. And that 5 minutes must be spent intentionally, reassociating your partner with safety and good intent, not additional pain, not more pain. And that shift, seeing the intent behind the action, to me is the blueprint for opening the door to hope again.
Creating the safe space.
Yes. Wow. Well, this was great information and tools, and we really appreciate you, Felipe, for being our guest and joining this important conversation.
Thank you.
We hope our community learned something. I know I did. And if they're interested in contacting you, your information will be included within the podcast at the end. And we want all of our audience out there to like, share, and subscribe, because you don't want to miss another topic on I Plan for Marriage, the podcast, where we're building relationships one conversation at a time.